to say that because in 2017, Italy signed a memorandum of understanding where they gave financial support to the Libyan Coast Guard in case of
Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am, again, not in the closet, though this time Briar is at work. No, today they're replacing our fridge and I feel like if I lock myself in the closet and I lock Nettle in the bedroom, she will go insane and tear up the carpet because she's a very odd little dog. So I'm hanging out on the bed and she's chewing my thumb. I hope you like the intro. I'm doing something a little different. I actually put the GoPro into the fish tank today, and now it's not wanting to work, so we'll see if I broke it irreparably or not. But in the meantime, I got some really cool looking footage of putting it in and everything, so we'll see how that turns out. Um, so I was thinking a bit about what I wanted to talk about today, and I thought I would actually talk about uh, some of my work to transitioning to male because it's been on my mind a lot and it was kind of a heck of a journey, especially since there is a lot of not talking to family anymore, then sometimes talking to family again, and mental health, and it's a lot. So, let me start by saying I was not one of those kids who have always known that he was transgender. When I was younger, it wasn't really something that crossed my mind. I was friends with boys mostly. I had a hard time having female friends, but it didn't seem like I was any different from them. Like I've mentioned before, I didn't even know what a dick looked like until I was well into adulthood. So, how would I know what they had in their pants? um, the first real change came when I was 12. Now, as with most AFAB people, I started getting my period, and it was not fun. I was mildly freaked out, to say the least. And my mom hadn't really taught me about anything. In that day, she taught me how to put a tampon in, and I hated it. I didn't understand why, but I tended to use tampons over pads anyway at that time, which I'm not really sure if that's a good thing for a 12-year-old or not, because, I mean, I was a stupid 12-year-old. I didn't know to change it regularly. Anyway, so after that, I started going through puberty, of course, and that meant the secondary female characteristics started. So the fat deposits moved to be on the hips and the butt, and breast tissue developed, and I was expected to wear makeup and expected to wear like feminine clothing by my mother. I also started gaining weight like most kids do when they hit puberty. And it was not a fun time. I remember when I was 15, my mom made fun of me for saying that eyeshadow made my eyelids feel heavy and I didn't like wearing it. I also had a very strange feeling when it came to having to put stuff like eyeliner or mascara on. I didn't like it anywhere near my eyes, so I would jerk away and my mom would almost poke my eye out. I never learned how to do it myself, so I just never wore mascara or eyeliner. When I wanted to try and fit in and try to feel feminine, I would wear eyeshadow and other makeup, but I wasn't any good at it. I also didn't know how to style my hair. My mom would get me these really cute little feminine haircuts, and then I wouldn't do anything with it, so it'd start growing out, and I would look like a hobgoblin or a chia pet. Sometimes I forget people can hear me through the door. Um, anyway, so what I was talking about was hair, makeup. I wasn't very good at performing femininity. Even my clothes, I wasn't very good at putting them on in a feminine manner. Not the, oh, boys put on shirts differently from girls thing. Just, I would put on clothes. I wouldn't think to style them or anything. I didn't really wear jewelry or any of that stuff. And I was a very awkward kid. Around the same time, when I was 15, I wanted to steal some of my dad's clothes. And they were very big, very baggy. They made me look boxy, and I enjoyed it a lot. My mom quickly made me stop after I told her one time this boy from behind, he didn't recognize me. He had thought I was a boy as well, which was upsetting, but okay. So then college started, and I found myself once again needing to try and perform femininity to an extreme. I have a couple of creepy photos still on Facebook of me dressed up, hair neat, trying to look. I look like a weird version of Sarah Palin, if I'm completely honest with myself. It was bad. Um, Sorry, Cheska is yelling at Nettle. I'm going to stop again. It's fun being locked in a single room with all of the pets, and the cat doesn't like the dog to be anywhere near her. Oh, I hope they replace the fridge soon. I can't hear anything, so I'm assuming they're not out there right now. Anyway, again, going back to what I was talking about, this was around 2012 when I was trying extra hard to perform gender. And to be clear, I graduated high school in 2011. It wasn't until my very last semester at Auburn that I began to truly realize I was transgender. And it started the semester before, because of course it did. It started with Welcome to Night Vale. Now, if you're not familiar with Welcome to Night Vale, it is a podcast that I believe is still ongoing. That was essentially like you could hear this radio host giving the local news to this town called Nightville. And it was very bizarre, supernatural. I loved it a lot. The biggest thing, though, was Cecil, the main character, the main voice. He was irrevocably in love with Carlos, an out-of-towner scientist who came in to inspect and experiment. They hadn't even met at the time, but he was in love with Carlos. And over time, I started to feel a strange kinship with Carlos. Not because I was a scientist, not because of any of that, but I felt like an outsider. And at the time, I was on Tumblr a lot. And there was a popular headcanon that Carlos was transgender. And I was like, what is this? Because you have to keep in mind, I mostly grew up in Alabama. A little 10 to 14,000 town. I think it's 10,000 people live there currently. Mostly white. Very Christian. So even though I knew LGBT, I knew a gay dude and a bisexual woman, but I didn't really understand what the T was. So this was my first real introduction to a transgender character. And I wrote a fanfic. It's actually still online. Don't look it up. And it was about Carlos being trans. It was about other things too. I had this headcanon that Cecil was being controlled by this other entity and he didn't even know it. So if he tried to leave Night Vale, then his preternatural powers would vanish and he would start to die. But it was mostly, for me, about Carlos being trans. And by the end of the story, I had killed Carlos, sort of, but I was full of questions. And I had started realizing this is me, because I hated my body. I specifically hated my breasts. If you'd ever seen the movie Dogma, the angels in that movie are like Ken dolls. They don't have any anatomy down there, and I wanted that. And I thought that had been just because of my asexuality at the time, because I was very sex averse at the start. But it wasn't. It was because of my dysphoria. And for the record, Dogma is also where you have that gif of the Jesus statue doing the finger guns. So if you haven't seen the movie, you absolutely should. It's fantastic. But getting back on topic again, we'll add another anyways here just for flavor. I felt seen realizing that I was trans, and this fanfic had so much support. People literally ordered me pizza when I mentioned that I was running a bit low on money for the week. My dog at the time tried to eat all of it, but I took it away from him. He was very good at getting on my desk. And for a bit, I was just happy. But that happiness quickly changed to anxiety because I didn't know how my family would react or anybody else. I didn't have a lot of friends, so I couldn't just speak with them. I wasn't part of the queer community at Auburn at the time. I knew there was a meeting of queer people, but I didn't go because I was so anxious. And I was anxious because the masculine role models I grew up with were my dad and mostly Baptist men. And to be frank, I didn't want to be like either of them. My dad was always working, he was rarely home. I didn't have much of a relationship with him. And what little relationship I had was, if I wasn't interested in cars, he didn't seem to want to have a lot to do with me. And I wasn't interested in cars. I was interested when he started making a fence for our backyard, but some guys came over and he sent me away because I was no longer needed, even though I'd been helping before then. He was also the person who did most of the violent, quote unquote, punishments. So, like spankings, I distinctly remember when he once smacked me across the face so hard I got a nosebleed. He only did that once, but I mean, once is all you need. He also, when I was much younger, completely tore apart my bedroom. And when I put it back together, he tore apart again and broke a jewelry box that I had from Japan. It was a Japanese jewelry box. And yeah, no, I wasn't feminine, but still, it was something I liked. And he broke it because he was angry at me. It was supposed to be some sort of punishment, I think, for hiding food wrappers in my bedroom or something. So there was that, and I'd always been told I was very similar to my dad, which I didn't like. So the idea of being similar to him to the point where I was a boy was scary. And then the Baptist role models, it's like people took a clone stamp, with very few exceptions. And by this time, I knew that the youth pastor had held a gun at his family. So even that one different role model was kind of not good. He was in the similar camp as my dad. So I was like, do I want to be a man? Because all I see are these awful things from the men in my life. And I struggled with that a lot. Nowadays, I identify as non binary transmasculine, but that's actually mostly a political statement. And also, it has its roots from the I didn't grow up with any good male role models, in my opinion. Not from the Bible, not from the adults around me. The best male role model I had was my 11th grade history professor. He was pretty great, but when you only have someone for a year in one class for like 45 minutes a day, there's not a whole lot that he can pass on down to you. And even then, he had some traits I didn't like. Like, he was very into basketball. He was the basketball coach. That's a thing, right? All male history teachers are coaches. Like, I'm not the only one who's noticed that, have I? Our driver's ed teacher was the football coach. It was, it's wild. But yeah, so for a very long time I was scared, and then I finally went to Spectrum, which is the GSA down in Auburn, the Gay Straight Alliance, if you're not sure what a GSA is or English isn't your first language. Um, and I met a trans guy, Chris, and he was okay. Admittedly, he was kind of a clone stamp of the Baptist dudes, at least in appearance, but he was so nice. He gave me resources to show my mom when I came out to her, and I came out to her pretty quickly because despite all the bad shit that had been on before, she was still my mom. And I trusted her opinion more than anyone's. And I started to get a little more comfortable with the idea of being a man. Like I said, I ended up coming out my final semester at Auburn. At the time, I didn't realize it would be my final semester, but it was because internet issues, dad issues, so many issues. But I ended up using my last two projects in my graphic design classes to come out. Well, my graphic design class and my printmaking course, because this is the first time I took printmaking. And I'll talk about that at another time. I will say I'm still a little upset about my grade in my layout class because he told us that he didn't have to understand the text for us to make a good grade. And I took an article that kind of described the gingerbread method of gender identity. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that or not, but I don't want to get into it right now. I can vaguely remember it, and I would not do it justice. So I took an article and I condensed that a lot. So there's a couple little awkward places. I'm like, he's not going to read the text that closely. He'll be fine. I got a B because of the text. Not because of how it was laid out, but because he was like, this doesn't make sense to me. And this is like a 70-year-old man. And then he wrote on my mock up, my final mock up. So I still have that, and I'm still bitter. I'm still bitter. I want to contest that B. I should have gotten an A. But I did come out to my mom. And she didn't really know how to take it. She wanted to keep calling me by my birth name and was like, I'll look into it in my own time. I gave her all these resources. I gave her a person she could talk to. I gave her Christian resources at that. But she wasn't super interested. So when I dropped out of Auburn, I ended up moving up to Illinois for a year. It was meant to be more than a year, but I moved up there for a year to just get away from Alabama, be with one of my friends from online. talk to my, at the time, fiance. And I was really depressed up there. It got to the point where I just wasn't a good friend, and my friends weren't being good to me. I broke up with my fiance, and I ended up moving back down. My mom and her boyfriend helped move me down again. And I was still trans. I was going by Isaiah at this point because I had been flipping through names for a bit, but it's mostly always been Isaiah. And I picked that name because at the time I was still a Christian and I thought it was a good biblical name. And it felt very similar to my dead name that I went by, Alyssa. Because, yeah, Alyssa is typically spelled Alyssa, but mine started with an I. It was supposed to be Alicia. But when you're the firstborn child of someone who's not even supposed to have children the traditional way, if at all, stuff happens. So I moved back down. My mom still called me Alyssa. I was told not to be publicly trans around her boyfriend's family because, again, this is Alabama and they're from a town that literally only has one red light. And I also started working at PetSmart at the time. And I started off going by Brittany, but one of the workers that was like introducing me to pet care noticed that I didn't look super happy at being called that and was like, well, what would you rather be called? And I was like, well, I'm trans. I'd like to be called Isaiah. And so that was the first time I got to be publicly Isaiah in my workplace. It was so nice. It was the first steps towards change for me. And this was in 2016. I was about 24 at the time. When I had moved back down to Alabama, I was like, I'm going to start transitioning because I know Chris transitioned in Huntsville, which is around where I lived. So I'm going to do that. And my mom told me, if you transition on my insurance, I will kick you off of it. Well, dumb me, wanting to make my mom happy, I chose not to physically transition yet. I wanted her to accept me as Isaiah. It was something I so desperately needed. And honestly, I don't know why. Because I waited until I was 26, I went further and further into depression. And for part of this, I wasn't even living at home. Or when I did live at my mom's house, she was hardly ever there because she was with her boyfriend all the time. But I did finally get on HRT at 26. For people that aren't in the US listening to this for some reason, hi, how did you find me? But in the US, children can be on their parents' insurance until they're 26 and they have to get their own. My mom still hadn't accepted me. The most that she was doing was keeping my name off of Christmas presents. And she thought that was a step forward. I don't know why, but whatever. Okay. I got on HRT and I actually went to a print workshop in Colorado, and my mom helped by paying for the plane tickets and stuff. It was really nice of her. But I was having a horrible time. It was the first time I'd ever flown on my own, and I had been trying to get in contact with her for several different days, and she never got in contact with me. She never called me back. She never texted me back except to say her cat was sick. And something about that made everything just fall into place for me at that moment. And I finally cut contact with her. It was like the final straw had been reached, and it wasn't even about me transitioning. I just didn't want anything to do with someone that made me feel so bad about myself. And that was my life for a bit. It was hard sometimes because my mom had always been my confidant. She had been the most stable person in my life because I had a hard time making and keeping friends up until that point. And significant things happened. I had to put my dog down because he had skin cancer. And that I'd had him since I was 16. I actually still have his ashes next to my bed. I went to New Orleans and I lost the stuffed animal that I've had since I was 3 because the hostel I was staying at was being awful. I got accepted to the University of Alabama and the University of the Arts for their book arts and printmaking program, and both of them with the highest possible scholarships and TA positions. COVID hit on my gallery opening. I tried twice to have top surgery, and both times failed. I moved to Philadelphia. I started dating my partner, and I'm going to be marrying them in November. But my mom wasn't part of any of this until very, very recently. Very recently, I decided to give her a chance. I had unblocked her phone number, and she sent me a text one day just talking about how she would like to talk to me and that she had accepted that I was trans and that I am her son. And we talked. Honestly, it's still hard. I don't feel like telling her everything because I don't know how much I trust it. But she has done a lot of research on her own. She is a child protective services worker, a very good one, down in Alabama. So she had access to these different conferences, and she would start taking the different ones about like trans issues or LGBT stuff with her friend from work, Candace, who is a lesbian. So I knew LGB growing up, I didn't know T. I don't know. It's still really hard accepting that she does see me as I see myself. And it's hard knowing that my partner has issues with their parents. I've actually stepped in a bit so that they don't put everything off as long as I have. But I am talking with my mom again. That's nice. I can finally have her back in my life, and I can tell her about getting married, or I told her recently about my breakdown in September that is kind of ongoing, and she didn't belittle me. Well, that's all a story for a different day, but it's been nice. And it's nice knowing that I'm transgender. It's nice knowing that I don't have to fit into these molds that I was shown as a kid. I don't have to be the pastel polo, khaki pants, side part man that I saw in my church all the time. And I don't have to be an angry, never home, not able to connect with my children parent either. I want to be a parent. I don't want to be a birth parent. I don't want to have an infant. I think I would be terrible at that. But I would like to adopt one day. And it would be nice to be a better parent than my parents were. as someone who's mentally ill and trans, I would have a better understanding. But I've been talking way too long. I'm realizing this video is going to be like 30 minutes because I have 2 little short clips as well. I will, small updates about the tanks. They're still going strong. Like I said, like you saw at the beginning, I put my GoPro in the fish tank for the first time ever. I'm going to see if the GoPro itself has survived and what is going on, and if I need to update the firmware because it's not very happy with me right now. But thank y'all so much for listening, especially if you've listened to this entire thing. It's very rambly and not very coherent, I'm sure, but I guess that's how it goes with the daily vlogs. I hope y'all have a good day. Get hydrated. I'll be getting some water once our fridge has been replaced, and I'll see y'all tomorrow.